The holidays are over. Let's get back to business. This weekend is the North American Continental Championships. It's insane to think that we are here. It is 2025. Happy New Year's from me to you. And I hope you did have a good holiday. But today we are here to break down the last few weekends of events, cover the meta report in full, give you some of the ideas of like, hey, these are the decks that you should expect to see at North American Continentals, in the LCQs, in the main event, and beyond, of course, even at set championships next week. Of course, this weekend probably will change some things and thoughts about next weekend for set championships. But hey, this is the event that can cover up to this point. There's a lot of information out there from the last couple weekends. It might have been holidays, but people were still playing Disney Lorcana. There were several events of 90 plus player tournaments, which is phenomenal. Can't wait to talk about them. Can't wait to give a shout out to those stores, and let's get into them. So this was the week 7 breakdown. We are now going into week 9, which is a North American Continental weekend. I just wanted to kind of showcase what the differences were between week 7 and week 8, and we can see the influx of over the last few weeks and how the meta has developed from European Continentals to CCS, to a Star City Games, things like that, as everything is breaking down and more public information is coming out there. Also, you can see we made an upgrade finally to the meta report. We don't just have ink combination here, we have specific deck breakdowns. So you can see in week 7, there were 5 Amber Steel Songs, 4 Ruby Sapphire Control, 3 Amethyst Emerald Tempo decks, 2 Amethyst Steel Jafar, 2 Amethyst Steel Midrange, 2 Ruby Amethyst Control, 2 Amethyst Steel Aggro, 2 Amber Steel Mufasas, 1 Amber Steel Aggro, 1 Amethyst Sapphire Control, 1 Amber Steel Aggro, and 1 Emerald Steel Midrange. So there you have it. We have just more information than just looking at ink combos. We are now going to take 2025 into the unknown. That's a little play on the podcast that Dick and I and Scott do together as we rotate through those. But hey, listen, this is it. We're going to see this more in depth. We have finally gotten to a point in Disney Lorcana when your opponent sits down and they ink an amber card and then they ink a steel card, we still don't know what they're playing. We can't rely on just looking at ink combos. We need to see what is the best decks from the ink combos, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing in 2025. You're going to see it here. You're going to see it a little bit later in the show also as we discuss the differences between week 7 and week 8. But here's the first week 7. Let's take a look at some of the decks from this weekend. So the winner of the 94 player at Southside Gaming was Casey, and they played a very interesting Ruby Amethyst deck. A bit of an offset here because there are a couple cards we have not seen yet in the metagame make an impact, and definitely not in Ruby Amethyst decks. But a card like Moana comes in as a 1 cost, 3 strength, 2 willpower, 1 lore, and of course your ability that you can't challenge unless there's a captain in play. Spoilers, there's no captains in this deck. This card is just stats. Being able to trade with basically every card in the game and forcing your opponent to interact with Moana is very important because in the end, they can't just let you sit forever and gain lore with this Moana. But what it also does is it enables a very early Flynn Rider. Moana on 1, Flynn Rider on 2. There are not a lot of ways for most decks to interact with that type of strength. So all of a sudden, your Flynn Rider gets to go off to the races even more early in games. That extra 3 lore that you can gain from a Flynn Rider trigger on your start at turn 3 is massive. So many games are coming down to 16 and 17 lore. So if all of a sudden you can pick up an extra 3 lore to start your turn 3 and then play a card like Sisu or play a card like Fox, have that 4 strength moving forward, you're going to consistently get more lore out of your Flynn Riders. I think in any game that you can gain 6 lore off Flynn Rider, it is going to be so difficult for your opponent to make up for that 6 lore. So relying on a card like Moana, followed up by a card like Fox or Sisu, Flynn Rider can be one of the most devastating cards in the game. Of course, you can see here the other big addition is Elsa, Spirit of Winter. That's right, the 8 cost uninkable, 4 strength, 6 willpower, 3 lore with shift 6 and the ability of deep freeze. When she comes into play, you get to exert 2 things and they stay frozen for a full turn. This is a card that we have seen a lot of play in Sapphire Amethyst, but not much play in Ruby Amethyst since, for being honest, Chapter 1, maybe the Chapter 1 plus Rise of the Floodborn metagame. but it's been a very long time since we've seen that card make an impact. Aside from that, everything else in here looks pretty straightforward. The Ruby cards are the choices being made. The most different is, of course, the Moana, 1 Sisu, 3 Brawl, 3 Be Prepared, 2 Maui, 2 Lady Tremaine, 2 Madame Medusa. All of those choices seem very fair to me, as this deck needs to have options to decide how it's going to kind of rotate through those turns and see its best way to manage the game state. Awesome finish by Casey here. Great win. Picked it up on stream over on Southside Gaming. Another top 8 player from that weekend and the most played deck from week 7 was, of course, Steel Songs. So what is Steel Songs doing differently? What is this deck doing differently that you need to be kind of weary of and looking forward to? Obviously, the 16 song suite is a good number, but it could be more than that. But you can see that the brunt of the uninkables in this list are made up in these cards. 4 Let the Storm Rage On, 4 And Then Along Came Zeus, 4 A Whole New World, followed up by, of course, 4 Daisy Ducks. That is the uninkables in this. Obviously, all 4 of those cards are incremental in the success of this deck, and you're probably going to need to see multiples throughout the game. This deck is also focused on a bigger singer package, having Cinderella on 1, Ursula on 2, and then you will have Ariel, Spectacular Singer, or Gaston. Both of those cards can sing 5. So having the ability for now 3 different singers that can sing Zeus, and of course 2 different singers that can sing A Whole New World is a pretty big deal. We're also making the choice to not play any Naveen's in this list. Aside from that, everything here looks pretty straightforward. I say the big standout here is playing Gontus. It's a 5 cost, inkable, 4 strand, 3 willpower with 4 lore. It really is just stats. I think I look at it similar to how I look at a Lilo. This is kind of just presenting a way to always say, hey, if you don't answer this card, it's going to gain a massive amount of lore. Lilo is a little bit harder to get away with in certain cases. We've seen other versions of this deck that play Zimba that can utilize that to pitch an early Lilo and bring it back later when necessary, kind of getting a free card out of your early Future Kings and things like that. Gontu is kind of also offering that. It's just saying, like, you're going to get to a point in the game where your opponent has to answer a lot of different cards to keep you off your best games. And when they're doing those things, they're running low on resources. So a card like Gontu coming down can represent 4 lore pretty easily when you're playing a deck similar to this one. All in all, shout out to Freddie here, picking up a top 8 with the Amber Steel Songs list at this SSG 94 player tournament. Another big deck on the week 7 meta was Amethyst Steel Midrange. This is another list that honestly has consistently been developing. This is a deck that I have been playing recently in different tournaments, and every single time I see one of these lists, I see different cards for it. And it's honestly, the most common question is like, what's the best version? They're all good. That's the real truth here. There's so many good Amethyst and Steel cards that combine to make this mid-range strategy that all of these lists end up being good. It really is just more of a comfort choice of what you believe in to be in your local metagame, which is a big deal. Obviously, when you're planning something for like an LCQ or an NACC, it's a little bit broader of a scope because you don't know as much information. You have no idea, what pod you're going to be in for LCQs. You don't know what your pairings are going to look like in NACC, so it's a little bit more difficult. But in these versions here, when you keep seeing these differences, cards like Lawrence, that's not a card that's particularly in every version of these. Fire the Cannons, not a card that's in every single version of these. Everything else here is a pretty standard option here. So it's not too shocking to me. But when you look at these lists, and honestly, there's a lot of them out there. If you want to go to Ink Decks and you want to look at the tournaments, normally we always have that in a description below, link to the tournaments and things like that. You're going to see lots of different cards being utilized in this particular strategy. This is just one of many, but still a huge shout out to Dylan picking up another top 8 here at SSG in the 94 player tournament. Speaking of SSG and Southside Gaming, they are hosting a 10K on February 8th in Miami, Florida. Unfortunately, it's sold out in 3 hours. That's insane. There's a wait list for it, but I think they've even closed the wait list at this point because there's just no way that's going to get to the number of wait lists and people dropping off. But it's actually insane that, a couple weeks ago, they hosted this free quad case event, which was crazy to begin with, giving away insane prizes. There's a whole stream on it. You should definitely go watch it. I'll put it in the description below. But now we're hosting another event here, which is a 10K in February, and yours truly is going to be there commentating the event. I'm so excited to go down there, meet the Southside Gaming crew, learn that atmosphere, because these guys are they're just so enjoyable to watch, and there's so much excitement around Disney Lorcana down in Miami with Southside Gaming. I can't wait to be a part of that action. So definitely check that out when it is. Don't worry, we'll be posting it on socials and things like that as well, and covering different things leading up to this event, and even discussing what might even be added to it. Absolutely crazy. 108 players capped in less than 3 hours. Remarkable. Can't wait to cover that event even more in the future. So now let's take a look at week 7 and 8 breakdown. So this is what we saw before 7, but include it in the week 8. And you can see a huge shift here. Ruby Sapphire and Ruby Amethyst both jump Amber Steel. Actually, Amber Steel songs basically didn't do anything in the week 8 because Amber Steel aggro made a huge jump as well. So a big difference in jumps from week to week here. Definitely a massive jump for Ruby Sapphire going to 17, Ruby Amethyst going to 11, and then Amber Steel aggro making a big jump to 9, where Amber Steel songs only went up to 7. Amethyst Emerald Tempo hanging in there with 5, and then Amethyst Steel aggro comes out to be the most successful Amethyst Steel deck with 5, Amethyst Steel Midrange still at 4, Amber Steel Mufasa at 3, Amber Amethyst aggro at 3, Amethyst Steel Jafar at 2, and then we run off the rest of the board. So there you have it. This is the big breakdown, and this is the last pieces of information we have going into the Continental Championship in North America. So when you look at this, you can see huge uptick in Ruby Sapphire. Why is that? Why all of a sudden did Ruby Sapphire figure it out? Why all of a sudden is it being successful? Because not only was it the most successful in top cuts, but I'm going to be honest, it won multiple big, large events with really large player pools. So not only is it saying, hey, we're finding our way to back into top cuts, but we're also finding a way to win tournaments. So this is a big information for people going into LCQs, and honestly, even going into the first week of set championships next week, is because they need to know what Ruby Sapphire has done to change their system. A lot of this has been going on. At EUCC, this was the most played deck. No, it wasn't the most successful. No, it wasn't in the top 4 or the finals or anything like that, but it was still the most played deck in EUCC. This is now coming back because now all of a sudden it's picking up wins again. So this is just something that this happens every metagame. We see the layers of things on average where it's like start strong, gets kind of picked up on, and then they have to adapt. Well, it looks like last weekend Ruby Sapphire found a way to adapt. Let's look into those deck lists. So here's our first Ruby Sapphire winner here. This is a 71 player tournament. Now the biggest takeaways here are things that we're looking at. Maui Shark making another appearance. 4 Sisu to be prepared. Having characters come and play and remove the nuisance of aggro characters is a big deal. Definitely gets around Pete and things like that. Forces your opponent to have specific characters to get past Sisu, which is a big deal. Raya. This is a card that we have seen in the past here and there, but it's not the most common version or common card that we can find in these lists, but it has been showing up a little bit more in recent memory. Another big deal here is we've dropped off down to 1 Lucky Dime, so we're not as reliant on Lucky Dime, and in all honesty, that's not too shocking because now you have a card like Maui Shark that can combo with all of these actions that you see in this deck. 4 Sails, 4 Visions, 4 Brawl, 3 How Far I'll Go, 1 Let It Go, 1 Pirate's Life, and 2 Be Prepared. These are ways for this deck to gain additional lore throughout the game, along with putting an impactful card in play that really halts the metagame. So this is the first version of this list. I want to take a look at the second version. I want to take a look at this version, which was won by Den, which was the Gold Star event, and it had 117 players. This version had 4 Maui Sharks. Huge commitment to Maui Shark, adding a hideaway to its list, adding a second Pirate's Life to its list. A little bit more actions, a little bit more consistency with Pirate's Life, having less big giant Tamatoa crabs, but still understanding that we have the 3 Sisu and the 2 Be Prepared, along with 4 Maleficent Dragons. Obviously, the other standout card here is Goofy. Goofy is just another way to kind of gain reach and gain lore when necessary. But the big takeaway from both of these lists, I believe, is Maui Shark. I think this is a card that when it came out, might have been a little bit overhyped. People really weren't figuring it out. It wasn't really as impactful. But now all of a sudden, I watched a bunch of games this weekend. I played a bunch of games this weekend. And a lot of times, Maui Shark is hitting play. And if your opponent doesn't have an answer to it, it really can take over the game. And I've also seen now in multiple different games that seeing multiple Maui Sharks has a way to just really frustrate opponents. The other day, the big 7-5 Maui Shark with evasive, it's not a card that gets very easy to get rid of. There's only very specific pinpoint removal that can answer it. Steel decks are very reliant on a long game Zeus to answer it. Sapphire decks can have Let It Go, it can have Hades, but it's still like, oh man, how do I get rid of that? Amber Steel, you need Zeus. It's that simple. So when that card like that comes out, not only does it freeze the board, because if you let your opponent go and get back and find a brawl or find a Pirate's Life and things like that. I also saw a version this weekend that we streamed over on Twitch that had develop your brains and nothing to hide. It's like there are just constant ways to consistently get an extra lore out of your card, draw cards, move the game forward, and just get the most out of your Maui Shark. I think that this is a big turning point for Ruby Sapphire decks, and just understanding that like they may have finally figured out how to make this card work, or players have stopped respecting the Shark. So if you're a Ruby Sapphire player, you might be able to take advantage of that. If you're not a Ruby Sapphire player and you're worried about the matchup, you probably need to find a way to have a consistent answer to the Shark. Big deal in the metagame right now, because like I said, both of these decks, picked up big wins, 117 players, 71 players. Those are two big tournaments that this deck came out on top of in a very similar type of list, both understanding that Maui Shark might be the key factor and finding a way to kind of just stop aggro in its trap, because when that card hits the table, if they don't have answer to it, it's very difficult for them to hit 20. At any given point, if you can play a Pirate's Life, challenge with Maui Shark, get back a Pirate's Life, that is 4 lore that you're taking away from your opponent. It's not necessarily about the lore that you gain, which is definitely putting you towards a winning position, but that 4 lore you're taking away, it is so difficult to make up 4 lore in Disney Lorcana. So it's a big deal. It's definitely something that you have to respect. There's a Vitalis Spear in play. You got to respect the idea that at any given time, after there's 7 resources, Maui Shark can come down and start doing work right away. Keep note of it. Understand that it could be a big deal for you in your matchup. The second place deck in that 117 player event this past weekend was Ruby Amethyst. And this is a very interesting list, because what we're learning and looking at right here is who needs Be Prepared. Honestly, there are 0. Who needs Big Sisu? Get out of here. We are just pedal to the metal aggression in this list, and I do love it. The funny thing about it is that on Inkdeck, this is listed as an aggro deck, and I don't know that I can classify it as an aggro deck, but it is definitely not the typical Ruby Amethyst control list. But it's also just proving that this list is just good without those cards. It can be successful without them. You don't have to rely on 7 and 8 cost uninkables to be successful. Just understanding that Flynn Rider plus Sisu can win you a ton of games. Having the slide removal of Lady Tremaine and Madame Medusa is phenomenal, and Brawl can still end up being one of the better removals in the game. No, it's not great to have to spend 3 resources to remove a card like Genie, but sometimes it's necessary, and if they don't have a good follow-up, then it is going to be a way to move the game forward in your favor. It's also understanding that later in the game, on those turn 6 and 7s, when you start seeing Genies, then it's okay, because you can be like, all right, Brawl your Genie, play my own Genie, or Brawl your Genie, play my own Rabbit. It's kind of staying equal on card advantage is a big deal if all of a sudden later in the game Brawls can make up for it. I just really wanted to highlight this version of Ruby Amethyst, because when you start talking about this deck being able to just say, I don't want Big Sisu, I don't want Be Prepared, your opponent, guess what? They're going to respect them anyway. They have to. You get to play in that world, because if they don't respect the idea that you have Be Prepared and you have Sisu, then it might just put you in a better position anyway. But that is the best part of being a closed deck list, is that your opponent doesn't know. In an open deck list format, you could never get away with a deck like this, if I'm being completely honest, because if your opponent says, oh, I'm playing against Ruby Amethyst, and they don't have Sisu, and they don't have Be Prepared, I'm just going to slam my dudes on the table and say, go ahead, figure it out. Blurple, because that's Blurple's biggest issue, right? They don't have answers. to wide boards in effective ways. So if all of a sudden you remove that and your opponent knows that, well, you're going to be in some danger for sure. Your opponent is going to play absolutely different against you. So that's a big up to having a closed deck list and having the information of saying, well, I don't have those cards, but my opponent has no clue. So huge shout out to Charles here, picking up a second place finish in this incredibly large tournament. Let's talk about, for a moment, the Amethyst Emerald. Now, this is a deck that is definitely a little bit more unique. As you can see, it has 2 Under the Seas here. And this is also kind of a big thing when we discuss that idea that your opponent has no idea. When you start looking for cards that are ways to offset matchups, there are a lot of games that are turning into, we're going to stand here until Elsa hits play. Once Elsa the Fifth Spirit comes in and starts tapping stuff, then we start doing this crazy trade war and all these kind of like crazy different things are happening. Well, if you're able to be on the play and, you're like, okay, on turn 2, I'm going to get my snake in there or my Ursula in there and it's just going to like sit. I'm going to kind of gain the information I need to. Turn 3, I'm going to play a white rose or something like that, or a crab, whatever I need to play, or even a kit is another good example. And then on turn 4, I'm going to play my genie or my goat. So you can kind of set that board up, be a little bit slower, and then all of a sudden your opponent is going to be like, all right, I'm going to put my genie into play. I'm going to, feel okay about this. It's not a big deal. They might have another character like lingering around and things like that. Well, if you all of a sudden you can turn the table by casting a Under the Sea, taking away 2 or 3 characters from your opponent, putting them on the bottom of their deck, stopping the draws from Diablo, removing genies, removing rabbits, like any of those cards, if you're able to get away with that type of play, it's going to make a big deal in games because now your opponent who was expecting to play an Elsa on 5 or expecting to play a Belle on 5, moving some damage, getting the extra effort in, they're not going to be able to. And that's a big deal because you can kind of control that. And your opponent is not going to be expecting a card like Under the Sea out of an Amethyst Emerald deck. So that's a pretty big deal when you really start thinking about the ways that you can build out your decks and kind of get ahead on opponents. Again, closed deck list, you can hide these things. Your opponent can't play around them. So if you're able to find cards that make sense in matchups, like a card like Under the Sea, I do believe in general, Under the Sea is very well positioned in this metagame. The metagame is ruled by 2 strength characters with high willpower. So, Steel's having issues, finding answers to those things constantly. All of a sudden, Under the Sea comes in, or cards like Muses, as an example that we're going to look at later. These are cards that can really affect the game. Just being able to tuck your opponent's genie away, that's great because it's gone. So, it's things like that we're looking for to get out of NACC in your LCQs, in your opening weeks of set championships. It's cards like this that really stand out early because it's just cards that people aren't going to expect whatsoever. So shout out to Tony here on the 4th place finish in the 41 player event at Quest KC. It was really cool to look at this and say, all right, like this is a different take on this list. And it's just understanding that like right now is a good time to try and catch people off guard for sure. Now let's take a look at that Gold Star 170 player tournament again with Amber Steel Aggro. So this is a list that does not have mines. Obviously, a few weeks ago, DeCandio won a 200 player tournament with an Amber Steel Mines aggro list. So this is not that, but this is also, finding a way here to put Mufasa in a deck list to be bigger. And that's a kind of a big deal when we're really talking about the metagame is what can we do in a predicted metagame? And, if there are decks like the Amber Steel Mines and Amber Steel Songs and things like that, a deck like this has this weird opportunity to kind of come in and just play a worse matchup into certain things that like those decks are good into, but it's good into those matchups. So if everyone just decided to, hey, we're going to play Amber Steel Mines and we're going to be a little bit low to the ground, and all of a sudden you come over the top and you have, big Cinderellas like that. How does Amber Steel aggro get rid of a big Cinderella? Like it almost just goes, yeah, cool. I can't answer that. Cards like Mufasa that replaced itself, like they're very annoying to deal with on the draw and things like that for decks like that. Chen Po, giant body. Like you talk about Pluto being annoying. Well, Chen Po is massively annoying because he's huge. So it's opportunity like this that a deck like this can come in and be successful. I mean, top 8, 117 player tournament is a big deal when you start looking at different decks like this. So I think it's a good focus here to understand that, yes, again, we're living in a world where Amber Steel might be the most popular in combination, but you're seeing 2, 3, 4 different versions of this deck between aggro, Mufasa, uh, songs, mines, locations. Even like I think locations is the worst of those, but it doesn't mean you can't see it and come across it. This is another version of it, just saying like, hey, if you're gonna do that thing, like I'm gonna play my Cinderella on one. I'm gonna have to have you respect it. Again, look at this list. There's only 6 songs in this deck, but a Cinderella on one still cripples opponents. They still don't play a 1 cost on average because they're like, man, I can't just get sniped by Let the Storm Rage on. That's a big deal. You have that information, your opponent doesn't. And again, with Amber Steel being so prevalent, turn 1 Cinderella, you could be playing any Amber Steel deck. Your opponent doesn't know that you only have 6 songs. They have no idea. Huge benefit again to closed deck lists of just being able to hide that information from your opponents. They can't just work with perfect information in a closed deck format. And I think that's a big deal for Disney Lorcana. It's a big deal in card games in general because it really does lead to more creative deck lists, I think, like this one, which I think is a real big deal and something that people like to have and be able to create for in general for the game. So there you have it. That was the 7 and 8 breakdown for Disney Lorcana leading into the national championship or the continental championship for North America. It's been a really crazy couple weeks because of the holidays, but you can see that Disney Lorcana still came to play. There were multiple, and I mean like 4 or 5 90+ player tournaments that were held over the last few weeks, which is crazy. But it also means people are going to play Lorcana. They're still looking for it. And this weekend is going to be a great weekend in North America. It's the last weekend that we know of for a while that we're going to be able to play Disney Lorcana to this level. There's going to be about over 1,000 people participating in LCQs, 128 players playing in the Continental Championship, side events all along. It's going to be a really fun weekend, but you need information to understand the best way to play this weekend. I think a lot of people have already decided on their deck list. I know I have, maybe not their deck list, but they've decided on what they are playing, and they're looking to kind of pick those last 3, 4, 5 cards. And this type of information is big. Understanding Maui Shark has made a resurgence in the metagame. Ruby Sapphire has made a resurgence in the metagame. Understanding that Ruby Amethyst is still finding success and being competitive. When you looked at that, yes, there was a bunch of different Amber Steel decks, and if we had one list, you would see Amber Steel being the top ranked deck or in combination. But that's not the case when you have Amber Steel Mines, Amber Steel Aggro, Amber Steel Mufasa, Amber Steel Songs, like all those things. Amethyst Steel is the same way. There's a lot of success in Amethyst Steel, but there's Midrange, there's Aggro, there's Jafar that we didn't cover in this, but hey, there was 2 Jafars in top 8 recently. So it's things like that when you look at this metagame, you have to understand the diversity in it. It's massive. It really is. I've played in 4 tournaments over the last 3 weeks as well during that time, and I played against a lot of different decks. In one tournament, I played against the same deck 3 times, but that's a little bit different. That's a niche thing. In the other events I played in, lots of different decks, lots of different choices, lots of different diversity. You just have to really understand what your matchups are when you're making that decision to go into NACC or your LCQ or even set championships next weekend. Understanding your deck is probably the best chance of success. You cannot predict, you cannot fairly assume what everyone else is going to play. You can try to, but honestly, your best chance of success is just being kind of like in that comfort zone with your deck. And that's exactly what I think most players should do. You're going to see the top decks come out this weekend. And if you can adapt and play those, it's probably going to be good for you. But if you can't, that's okay too. Just going in, knowing your matchups is all that's going to be really important. I'm very much looking forward to NACC this weekend. A great kickoff to the year, having, a week in Anaheim. I'll be there Thursday morning. And then Friday LCQs. Hopefully I 5-0. I get to play in Continentals. That's the dream. If I can't, I'll be there all weekend playing in side events. And then I'm doing Disneyland on Monday and Tuesday with the rest of the team. I'm very excited for this event. I think that we've been building up to this all year, which is great in a way. 6 North American DLCs leading into the LCQ system. And that's just kind of where we are. And I'm very excited to participate and just be there because Right now, we do not know the next time that we're going to get together in North America to participate in a Disney Lorcana challenge. So with that, I'm going to make the most of this weekend. If you're there, if you haven't, definitely come up, say hello to me, fist bump, handshake, hug, whatever you're into. I would look forward to the conversations, and I'm really looking forward to spending a nice weekend with the team in Anaheim, California. It's been a great couple of weeks. Hope everyone had a great holiday, a safe and happy New Year's. I'm very excited to kick off 2025 with this event. So thank you guys so much for watching today. If you're looking for more things like this, you probably take out this video. Also, I'm coming out with some interesting new content based on the off meta decks that you saw on this list. They're going to be the next video on the channel. So if you want to check those out, definitely hit subscribe and hit that like button for me today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.